I Am the Great Horse, Chapter 15, Gaza, An Unexpected Arrow. This is around 332 BC. After the example Alexander made of Tyre, no one dared so much as squeal at us the rest of the way down the coast. General Parmenio rejoined us, so we were a huge, strong herd when we reached the Phoenician border. It looked as though we might ride straight through into the Egyptian world with no more fighting. But in the last moment, a place called Gaza closed its gates to us. Alexander laughed and said its boss must not yet have heard about Tyre. He ordered the army to make camp on the beach, and we led the guard inland through the sand dunes to see if we could make Gaza change its mind. I had some trouble in the desert. Size is not necessarily a good thing on soft sand. Also, I was thirsty and too hot from the march, so I was not quite as alert as usual. When Alexander halted me at the top of a dune to take a look at the city, a herd of strange horses with silly dished faces and a ridiculously high tail carriages came galloping over the top, and a curtain of arrows hissed out of my blind side toward us. I leaped in panic, but my hooves sank in the sand, and Alexander gasped as his weight jerked on my back. I'd carried riders in enough battles to know this was a bad sign, and I felt a stab of shame. Hephaestion whipped out his sword and yelled, "After them!" He urged Ptasios after the strange horses, but of the guard, only Hades and Aura could really handle the sand. The others were soon left behind as the enemy fled into the city, waving their bows over their heads and whooping. The loose horses followed their friends through the gates, which slammed shut behind them. They left me alone on the top of the dune. I wanted to gallop after my herd, but I knew I must stay with my rider. Alexander had fallen off me and lay in the sand near my hooves. Blood was spurting from his shoulder where the arrow had found its way through a joint of his armor. I sniffed him to check that he was not dead, then settled to my knees beside him. The dry desert wind lifted my mane and fluttered the black feathers of the arrow. Alexander struggled up on his good elbow, flopped back, and shut his eyes with a groan. He whispered, "Bucephalus, my faithful horse. Don't leave me. This isn't meant to happen. I can't die. Zeus is supposed to be looking after me. Oh, horse, it's all going dark." "Alex!" cried an anguished voice as Ptasios stopped in a spray of sand beside us. I whinnied in relief to my red friend. Hephaestion leaped off him, kneeled beside Alexander, and put a hand on the king's forehead. He closed a fist around the arrow sticking out of his shoulder, shook his head, and with a grimace removed his hand. "Get up, you big lump," he said to me, sticking his elbow into my shoulder. "The king's too sick to ride you back to camp. We'll have to get a stretcher. Alex, hold on, do you hear? We won't let you die. It's only a scratch. You'll be fine." But his voice faltered, which meant this was probably a lie. The others returned, out of breath, and stared at the king in horror. Hephaestion yelled at them to get moving. Couldn't they see the king needed a doctor? And what were they playing at, letting the Arabs get so close to him? He squealed like a stallion who knew he had just done the wrong thing by leading them after the enemy, and was trying to remind everyone else he was still boss. But it was my fault, all mine. I was so deeply ashamed. I let Aeolus lead me back to the horse lines without making a fuss. Hades had done better than me, so when he gave me flat ears, I didn't even nip him. My riderless state scared Charm. She rushed up to take my rein from Aeolus, her face as pale as Alexander's had been lying on the dune. "What happened?" she gasped. "Where's the king? Oh, Zeus, he's not—" Aeolus pulled a face. "Dead? No, not yet. But I'm not sure how much longer we'll be able to keep him alive if he keeps on taking risks like this. Why do we have to beat down the walls of every city that closes its gates to us? Why can't we just go after King Darius and finish this stupid war? The longer we stay here, the longer The Persians will have to raise another army. Father might like being regent of Macedonia, but he won't keep the throne for long without us to defend it for him." Realizing a circle of curious grooms had gathered, he muttered, "Yes, well, the king's wounded, but he'll live. He'll have plenty of time to recover anyway. Would you believe General Parmenio wants us to build a mound around the city, the same height as Gaza's hill? I didn't join the army to build bridges across the sea and mountains in the desert. Ugh. I'm a cavalryman, not a common laborer. I've got to go. The king needs me." Iolaus hurried off, still grumbling. Charm stared at Zoroaster. "It was the curse," she whispered. Tityos made a face. "It was those Arabs. King Alexander wasn't careful enough. He seems to think he's immortal or something since he cut the Gordian knot. It's like when he jumped into that river at Tarsus when he couldn't even swim. Maybe now he'll stop doing such stupid things." Charm put her arms around my neck and squeezed tightly. "Oh, Bucephalus," she whispered. "At least you're all right. I suppose if Alexander's wounded, he can't go to Gaza and do to Gaza what he did to Thebes and Tyre. That'll be a good thing, won't it?" Charm ought to have known Alexander better than that. Both his body and his pride had been hurt. He swore to knock down Gaza's walls and teach its boss a lesson he would never forget. Our siege engines soon got stuck in the soft sand. When even the mules couldn't move them, the old mule master waved the sticks he had tied to his arms and yelled at his muleteers to get those mules out of range before the Gazians start shooting from the walls. Meanwhile, the Arab mercenaries who had wounded Alexander galloped out, picked off some of our men, and fled back in again. On hearing the reports, Alexander threw things around his tent and shouted at his doctors and his guard, who were all trying to keep him in bed. They didn't have a hope. When the mound around the city was finished, Alexander insisted on leading the attack himself, even though his shoulder was only half healed. He was too dizzy to ride me and went off to Gaza in a chariot driven by Hephaestion. So once again, I had nothing to do. I had to stay back in that camp with the nervous grooms until the men began to trail back with their wounded. That was when we learned that a rock from one of Gaza's anti-siege catapults had cracked Alexander's leg as he led the charge over the battlements. Charm clutched my mane and whispered, "I don't care what Tityos says. It's the Persian god's curse. I know it is. We should never have backed Zoroaster. Oh, Bucephalus, I think Alexander's going to get himself killed in this horrible place." But Alexander did not die in Gaza. When we finally smell the king's sherbet sweetness in the horse lines, it is so drenched in other smells from the battle that I hardly recognize him. He's in a foul mood, limping with his cracked leg, a hand pressed to the bloody bandage on his shoulder, filthy, sweating, red in the face. Leonidas and Philotas follow, hauling between them an enormously fat man with brown skin. The prisoner's arms have been bound behind him. Blood trickles from the corner of his mouth, and one of his eyes is swollen shut. The rest of the guard hurry after them, all as sweaty and dirty as their king. The grooms stop what they're doing to stare. "Charmides," Alexander calls, "harness Bucephalus to a chariot. Put him with that big golden horse, Xanthus." "Wait, Alexander," calls General Parmenio, frowning at his son Philotas as he hurries past. His hairy legs are bleeding and crusted with sand. "This man ruled Gaza for the Persians. He deserves better treatment." "He deserves to be treated like the animal he is," Alexander mutters through clenched teeth. "This ugly creature is no more a man than Zoroaster is a stallion. He heard what happened to Tyre, yet he still dared to challenge me. Those Arabs of his nearly killed me in the desert with that arrow. He has condemned his city by refusing to acknowledge me as king. And he even dares to suggest I'm the son of a commoner. He won't admit it, but he can only have heard that rumor from my father's interfering old horsemaster. He probably knows who was behind my father's assassination, too. Gaza is the gateway to Egypt. Someone must have told him to stop me from reaching the Siwag oracle." He scowls at the prisoner. "This is your last chance. Either tell me the truth or die." The dark man's bruised mouth laughs at the king. You wouldn't see the truth, Alexander, if it hit you in the eye. If you carry on like you are, you'll come up to the same bad end as that tyrant Philip you claim sired you." "Shut him up!" Alexander yells. "Gag him!" Leonidas and Philotas glance at each other. Philotas coughs and says, But I thought you wanted him to talk." Alexander turns on them with a furious expression. "I've heard enough of his lies. Do it!" Philotas glances at his father for confirmation, but Leonidas tightens his lips, knots one of our bandages, puts it in the dark man's mouth, and ties it behind his head. The boss of Gaza grins around the gag, his one open eye fixed defiantly on Alexander. Charm puts a trembling hand on my neck and lifts her chin. "I don't think Bucephalus has pulled a chariot before, sir," she whispers. "I don't know about Xanthus, but war horses aren't usually trained to pull chariots." Alexander clenches a fist. Charm shrinks closer to me, but he doesn't hit her. He presses his knuckle to his forehead and snaps, "Put 2 of those Persian horses in a chariot then. It'll make no difference to this ugly creature. Move!" Charm and Tityos run off to prepare the chariot, so they don't see what Alexander orders done to the boss of Gaza. This is probably just as well. Few humans have stomachs for such things. Even our grooms go pale. One youngster faints. When Charm and Tityos return, leading the Persian horses yoked to the chariot, Alexander's guard is looking almost as sick as our grooms. General Parmenio shakes his head, mutters something about needing a bath, and strides off to his tent, ordering his son to follow him. Philotas casts an apologetic look at Alexander and hurries after his father. A lead rein has been attached to the prisoner's ankles, and Leonidas fastens it to the back of the chariot. Alexander snatches up a whip and looks down at the former governor of Gaza, who's now quiet. Alexander's breathing slows slightly as he crouches beside him. "I am the reborn Achilles. This is what Achilles did to his enemy, Prince Hector, outside the walls of Troy. So I am treating you a lot better than you deserve. I want you to know that before you die." He climbs stiffly into the chariot and gathers up the reins in his good hand. He shouts at Charm and Tityos to let go of the horses, grunts with the pain of raising his wounded arm, and lashes them with the whip. The horses take off immediately, as they've been trained to do. The prisoner's body jerks as the rein attached to his ankles tightens, and he bounces along behind the chariot in the dust and the flying sand. The grooms run after it. That is the last I see of the governor of Gaza, although a little later his ghost screams past the horse lines, lifting our manes and making us all shiver. Tityos puts his arm around Charm and whispers, "Don't watch. The king is angry because he got wounded. He'll calm down soon. This is war. That man was our enemy. At least he'll die quicker than those poor men Alexander had crucified at Tyre." Charm shudders and stares after the cloud of dust. "No one deserves that," she says in a fierce little voice. "No one." An uneasy hush falls over the horse lines. Alexander's friends look at one another. I hear some of them whisper that this isn't what they came for, that if he's going to keep doing things like this, they'd rather go home than follow him any further. As for what made everyone so sick and faint, if you're squeamish, you'd better skip to the next chapter now. If not, I will stop there. Those of you who are not squeamish can make the decision whether you're going to read it on your own, but I will not subject the entire class to that portion.